When venue security supervisor Tom Bradley was conducting his routine post-concert sweep of the Crocodile Cafe in Seattle on October 23, 1992, he expected to find the usual aftermath of a Nirvana show: empty beer bottles, discarded set lists, and maybe a few forgotten pieces of equipment. What he discovered instead, curled up behind a stack of amplifiers in the corner of the backstage area, would lead to one of the most heartwarming stories in rock history. Sleeping on a pile of old stage curtains was a thin, dirty teenager who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. The boy was clutching a worn paperback copy of The Catcher in the Rye and wearing clothes that were clearly too big for his small frame. He couldn't have been more than 16 years old, and he was obviously homeless. But what nobody knew at the time was that this chance encounter would change both the teenager's life and Kurt Cobain's understanding of what it meant to use his fame for something meaningful. The homeless boy's name was Jesse Reed, and his story of survival, hope, and ultimate success would become one of Kurt's most closely guarded secrets and greatest sources of pride. What Kurt did for Jesse that night went far beyond simple charity. It was an act of genuine compassion that would ripple through both of their lives for years to come. And the most remarkable part wasn't what Kurt gave to Jesse, but what Jesse gave back to Kurt in return. Jesse Reed had been living on the streets of Seattle for nearly 8 months when he first encountered Nirvana's music. At 15 years old, he had aged out of the foster care system and found himself with nowhere to go and no family to turn to. He had been bouncing between homeless shelters, abandoned buildings, and park benches, trying to survive on his own in one of America's most expensive cities. I was pretty much at the end of my rope when I first heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit" on someone's radio, Jesse recalled in a 2010 interview. Something about that song spoke to me. The anger, the frustration, the feeling of being an outsider. It felt like Kurt was singing about my life. Jesse began seeking out Nirvana's music wherever he could find it. Record stores, libraries, friends' houses. Anything to hear more of the songs that seemed to understand his situation. The lyrics resonated with his experiences of feeling abandoned, misunderstood, and angry at a world that seemed indifferent to his suffering. Kurt's music became like a lifeline for me, Jesse explained. When everything else in my life was chaos and uncertainty, those songs were something I could count on to make me feel less alone. When Jesse learned that Nirvana was scheduled to perform at the Crocodile Cafe, he knew he had to find a way to attend the show. The problem was that he had no money for a ticket and no identification to prove his age for entry into the 21. Jesse spent several days casing the Crocodile Cafe, learning the layout and looking for opportunities to sneak inside. He discovered that the venue's loading dock was often left unguarded during sound checks, providing a potential entry point for someone desperate enough to take the risk. I knew I was taking a huge chance, Jesse admitted. If I got caught, I could end up in juvenile detention or worse. But the thought of missing Nirvana was unbearable. Their music had become so important to me that I was willing to risk everything to see them perform. On the afternoon of October 23rd, Jesse positioned himself near the loading dock and waited for the right moment to slip inside. When he saw crew members carrying equipment and appeared distracted, he quickly ducked the open door and hid among the cases and amplifiers in the backstage area. My heart was pounding so hard I thought someone would hear it, Jesse remembered. I found a spot behind some speakers where I thought I could hide until the show started, and then maybe work my way into the main venue. But Jesse's plan was complicated by exhaustion and hunger. He hadn't eaten in 2 days and had been sleeping in doorways, leaving him physically and mentally drained. As he waited in his hiding spot, listening the sound check, he gradually fell asleep. I didn't mean to fall asleep, Jesse said, but I was so tired and the music was actually kind of comforting. The next thing I knew, someone was shaking me awake. The person shaking Jesse awake was Tom Bradley, the venue's security supervisor, who had discovered him during the post-concert cleanup. Bradley's first instinct was to call the police and have Jesse arrested for trespassing. But something about the teenager's appearance made him hesitate. This kid looked like he was in bad shape, Bradley recalled years later. He was skinny, dirty, and clearly hadn't been taking care of himself. I could have just thrown him out, but something told me there was more to the story. Instead of immediately calling the authorities, Bradley decided to wake up Kurt, who was still in the venue signing merchandise and talking with fans. Bradley figured that since Jesse was obviously a Nirvana fan, Kurt might want to handle the situation personally. I thought maybe Kurt would want to know that we had found this kid backstage, Bradley explained. It seemed like the kind of thing he would want to be involved in, rather than just having us deal with it ourselves. Kurt was in his dressing room, winding down from what had been a particularly energetic performance, when Bradley knocked on his door and explained the situation. Tom told me they had found a homeless teenager sleeping backstage, Kurt recalled in a later interview. My first thought was that we needed to make sure the kid was okay before we decided what to do about the trespassing. Kurt followed Bradley to where Jesse was still sitting among the amplifiers, looking scared and embarrassed about being discovered. When Kurt saw the teenager's condition, his expression immediately changed from curiosity to concern. This kid looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks, Kurt observed. He was way too thin, his clothes were dirty and didn't fit, and he had this look in his eyes like he expected the worst to happen. Kurt approached Jesse slowly, not wanting to frighten him further, and sat down on one of the equipment cases nearby. "Hey," Kurt said gently. "I'm Kurt. What's your name?" "Jesse," the teenager replied quietly, clearly intimidated by meeting his musical hero under such circumstances. "How long have you been back here, Jesse?" Kurt asked. "Since this afternoon," Jesse admitted. "I know I wasn't supposed to be here. I just really wanted to see you guys play." Kurt studied Jesse's appearance more carefully and began to piece together the teenager's situation, the ill-fitting clothes, the exhausted demeanor, the fact that he had been sleeping backstage. It all pointed to someone who was living on the streets. "Where do you live, Jesse?" Kurt asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Nowhere, really," Jesse replied, confirming Kurt's suspicions. "I've been staying different places around the city." Kurt felt his heart sink as he realized he was talking to a homeless teenager who was probably not much younger than Kurt had been when he started Nirvana. The thought of someone so young being forced to survive on their own triggered all of Kurt's protective instincts. "When's the last time you had something to eat?" Kurt asked. Jesse thought for a moment before answering. "Yesterday, I think, maybe the day before." That was all Kurt needed to hear. He immediately stood up and announced his decision to everyone within earshot. "Jesse's coming home with me tonight," Kurt declared. "We're going to get him fed and cleaned up, and then we're going to figure out what to do next." The announcement caught everyone off guard, including Jesse, who couldn't believe that his musical hero was inviting him home. "I thought I was dreaming," Jesse later said. "Here I was, expecting to get arrested for trespassing, and instead Kurt Cobain was inviting me to his house. It was surreal." Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic, who had been watching the conversation from a distance, were not entirely surprised by Kurt's decision. They had seen him react with compassion to fans in difficult situations before, but this was more extensive than his usual gestures of kindness. Kurt had a real soft spot for people who were struggling, Dave Grohl recalled. When he saw someone in need, especially someone young, he couldn't just walk away. It went against everything he believed in. The logistics of taking Jesse home required some quick thinking. Kurt lived with Courtney Love in a house in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, and he would need to explain the situation to her before arriving with an unexpected house guest. Kurt called Courtney from the venue and explained what had happened. Her reaction was immediate and supportive. "Bring him home," Courtney said without hesitation. "We'll figure out the details later." The drive from the Crocodile Cafe to Kurt's house gave Jesse and Kurt their first real opportunity to talk. Jesse told Kurt about his experiences in foster care, his aging out of the system, and his struggles to survive on Seattle's streets. Jesse's story was heartbreaking, Kurt reflected later. Here was this smart, articulate kid who had been failed by every system that was supposed to protect him. He was basically raising himself on the streets of Seattle. Jesse, meanwhile, was overwhelmed by the surreal nature of his situation. A few hours earlier, he had been a homeless teenager sleeping behind amplifiers. Now he was riding in a car with one of the famous musicians in the world, heading to his house for dinner. "I kept thinking I was going to wake up and find myself back on the street," Jesse remembered. It was too good to be true. When they arrived at Kurt's house, Courtney was waiting with a hot meal and clean clothes that she had quickly gathered from Kurt's wardrobe. Her warmth and acceptance made Jesse feel immediately welcome. "Courtney treated me like family from the moment I walked in the door," Jesse said. "She didn't ask a lot of questions or make me feel like a charity case. She just made sure I had what I needed." Over dinner, Jesse shared more details about his background and his current situation. He had been living in various foster homes since the age of 7, when his parents died in a car accident. The foster care system had provided basic necessities, but little in the way of emotional support or stability. Jesse was clearly intelligent and motivated, Kurt observed, but he had been bounced around so much that he never had the chance to establish roots or build relationships with adults who could guide him. When Jesse aged out of foster care at 15, he had been given a small stipend and essentially told to figure out life on his own. With no family connections and limited resources, he had quickly found himself homeless. "The foster care system basically abandoned me when I turned 15, Jesse explained. "They gave me a few $100s and wished me luck. I had no idea how to live independently." Kurt and Courtney were appalled by the system's failure to provide adequate support for teenagers transitioning out of foster care. They immediately began discussing ways they could help Jesse get back on his feet. It was clear that Jesse needed more than just a meal and a place to sleep for one night, Courtney reflected. He needed stability, education, and someone to believe in his potential. That first night, Jesse slept in Kurt's guest room, the first real bed he had experienced in months. The comfort and security of being in a safe, warm house was almost overwhelming after months of sleeping in airways and abandoned buildings. "I didn't sleep much that first night," Jesse admitted. "I was afraid that if I fell asleep I would wake up and discover it had all been a dream." The next morning, Kurt and Courtney sat down with Jesse to discuss his options for the future. They offered to let him stay with them temporarily while they worked together to develop a longer-term plan. "Kurt and Courtney didn't just offer me a place to crash," Jesse clarified. "They wanted to help me build a real life. That meant dealing with legal issues, getting back in school, and planning for the future." The first step was addressing Jesse's legal status. As a minor who had been living on the streets, he was technically a runaway, even though he had aged out of the foster care system. Kurt hired a lawyer to help navigate the bureaucratic complexities of Jesse's situation. "Kurt insisted on getting professional help to make sure we did everything properly," Courtney recalled. "He wanted to make sure that Jesse's best interests were protected and that we weren't inadvertently making his situation worse." The legal process took several weeks, but ultimately resulted in Kurt and Courtney becoming Jesse's legal guardians. This gave them the authority to make decisions about his education, health care, and general welfare. "Having Kurt and Courtney as my legal guardians changed everything," Jesse explained. "For the first time in my life, I had adults who were committed to my success and well-being." With the legal issues resolved, the next priority was getting Jesse back in school. He had dropped out during his final months in foster care, when the instability of his living situation made it impossible to attend classes regularly. Kurt personally visited several high schools in the Seattle area to find one that would be welcoming to a student with Jesse's unconventional background. He eventually found a progressive school that specialized in helping students who had experienced educational disruptions. "Kurt didn't just write a check and hope for the best," Jesse remembered. "He was actively involved in finding the right educational environment for me. He met with principals and teachers, explaining my situation and advocating for my acceptance." Jesse's return to school was challenging at first. He had missed significant amounts of coursework and struggled to readjust to the structure and expectations of formal education. But with Kurt and Courtney's support and encouragement, he began to thrive academically. "Having a stable home environment made all the difference in my ability to focus on school," Jesse noted. "I didn't have to worry about where I was going to sleep or when I would eat next, so I could actually concentrate on learning." Kurt took a personal interest in Jesse's education, helping with homework when his touring schedule permitted and celebrating academic achievements with the same enthusiasm he showed for musical milestones. "Kurt was proud of every good grade I got," Jesse recalled with a smile. He would show my report cards to his friends like I was his own son. As Jesse settled into his new life, he and Kurt developed a close relationship that went far beyond the typical guardian-ward dynamic. They shared interests in literature, politics, and social justice that provided common ground for conversations. Kurt became like a big brother to me, Jesse explained. He was someone I could talk to about anything: school, relationships, my fears about the future. He always listened without judgment and offered thoughtful advice. Kurt, meanwhile, found that his relationship with Jesse provided him with a sense of purpose and perspective that helped balance the pressures of fame. Watching Jesse overcome his difficult circumstances reminded Kurt of the resilience of the human spirit. Having Jesse in our lives was incredibly rewarding, Kurt reflected. Seeing him transform from a scared, homeless kid into a confident young man reminded me that positive change is possible, even in the most difficult circumstances. Jesse's presence in the household also had a positive effect on Kurt's mental health. The responsibility of caring for someone else provided structure and meaning that helped Kurt manage his own struggles with depression and addiction. Taking care of Jesse gave Kurt a sense of purpose that went beyond music, Courtney observed. It reminded him that he could use his success to make a real difference in someone's life. As Jesse's senior year of high school approached, discussions about college became a regular topic of conversation in the household. Jesse had proven himself to be an excellent student and was interested in pursuing higher education, but the financial requirements seemed daunting. Kurt immediately committed to paying for Jesse's college education, regardless of which school he chose to attend. This generous offer opened doors that would have been impossible for Jesse to access on his own. Kurt didn't just offer to pay tuition, Jesse clarified. He offered to support me through whatever educational path I wanted to pursue. That kind of unconditional support was something I had never experienced before. Jesse ultimately chose to attend the University of Washington, where he studied social work with the goal of helping other young people who had experienced similar challenges. His choice of major was directly inspired by his own experiences and Kurt's example of compassion. I wanted to work with kids who were aging out of foster care, Jesse explained. Kurt had shown me how much difference one person could make in a young person's life, and I wanted to pay that forward. Throughout Jesse's college years, Kurt remained actively involved in his life, attending graduation ceremonies, celebrating achievements, and providing ongoing emotional support. Their relationship continued to deepen as Jesse matured into an independent adult. Kurt never made me feel like a burden or a charity case. Jesse emphasized, he treated me like family, and that made all the difference in my ability to succeed. After graduating from college, Jesse went on to establish a successful career in social work, eventually founding his own nonprofit organization focused on supporting teenagers transitioning out of foster care. His work has helped hundreds of young people avoid the homelessness and instability that he experienced. Everything I've accomplished in my career traces back to what Kurt did for me that night at the Crocodile Cafe, Jesse reflected. He didn't just save my life, he gave me the tools and confidence to save other lives. Kurt's support for Jesse continued until his death in 1994. Just 2 years after their first meeting, Jesse was devastated by the loss of his mentor and father figure, but he was determined to honor Kurt's memory by continuing the work of helping others. When Kurt died, I felt like I had lost the most important person in my life, Jesse admitted. But I also knew that the best way to honor his memory was to keep helping other kids who were in situations like mine had been. Jesse's nonprofit organization, which he named the Reed Foundation in honor of his own transformation, has become one of the most successful youth advocacy organizations in the Pacific Northwest. The foundation provides housing, education support, and career counseling for young people aging out of foster care. Jesse's success is Kurt's greatest legacy, Courtney Love reflected years later. Kurt saved one teenager from homelessness, and that teenager went on to save hundreds of others. The ripple effect of Kurt's compassion continues to this day. The story of Kurt's relationship with Jesse remained largely private during Kurt's lifetime, in accordance with Jesse's wishes for privacy and normalcy. It wasn't until years after Kurt's death that Jesse began sharing his story publicly, as a way of honoring Kurt's memory and inspiring others. Kurt never sought publicity for what he did for me, Jesse noted. He helped me because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted recognition. But I think it's important for people to know about this side of who he was. Jesse's story provides a different perspective on Kurt Cobain's character than the troubled artist narrative that often dominates discussions of his life. It shows a man who was capable of profound generosity and who understood the responsibility that came with his success and platform. People tend to focus on Kurt's struggles with addiction and depression, Jesse observed, but they often miss the fact that he was someone who genuinely cared about others and was willing to make significant sacrifices to help people in need. The transformation of Jesse Reed from a homeless teenager to a successful social worker and nonprofit founder demonstrates the profound impact that one person's compassion can have on another's life trajectory. Kurt didn't just give me a place to live and money for school, Jesse emphasized. He gave me something much more valuable. He showed me that I mattered, that I had potential, and that my life could make a difference. Today, Jesse continues his advocacy work and frequently speaks about his experiences to groups of social workers, foster care professionals, and young people in similar situations. His story serves as both inspiration and practical guidance for others working to help vulnerable youth. My relationship with Kurt taught me that helping someone doesn't require grand gestures or unlimited resources, Jesse explains to audiences. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply see someone's potential and believe in their ability to succeed. The Reed Foundation has helped place over 500 young people in stable housing and educational programs since its founding. Many of these young people have gone on to successful careers and have become advocates for others, creating an ever-expanding network of support and compassion. Kurt's act of kindness toward me has multiplied hundreds of times over, Jesse noted. Every person we help at the foundation represents another life that Kurt's compassion has touched, even though he's no longer here to see it. Jesse's story also highlights the ongoing challenges faced by young people aging out of the foster care system. His experience demonstrates both the vulnerability of these individuals and their potential for success when provided with appropriate support. Jesse's success story shows what's possible when we invest in young people who are struggling, observed Dr. Patricia Williams, a social work professor who has studied foster care outcomes. But it also highlights how many Jesse Reeds are out there who never get the support they need. The legacy of Kurt's relationship with Jesse extends beyond individual success stories to broader policy implications. Jesse's advocacy work has contributed to reforms in foster care policies and increased support for transition-age youth. Kurt's decision to help me wasn't just about changing one person's life, Jesse reflected. It was about demonstrating the kind of society we could have if more people were willing to step up and help those in need. For Jesse, the most important lesson from his relationship with Kurt was about the transformative power of believing in someone's potential, even when they can't see it themselves. When Kurt found me backstage that night, I was convinced that I was worthless, and that my life would never amount to anything, Jesse remembered. But Kurt saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. That belief changed everything. The story of Kurt Cobain and Jesse Reed serves as a powerful reminder that fame and success create opportunities to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. Kurt's decision to open his home and heart to a homeless teenager demonstrates that true heroism often happens away from the spotlight, in quiet acts of compassion that change lives forever. Jesse Reed's transformation from homeless teenager to successful advocate shows that, with the right support and encouragement, anyone can overcome difficult circumstances and build a meaningful life. His story stands as a testament to Kurt Cobain's belief in the potential of every person and the responsibility we all have to help those in need. If this incredible story of transformation and compassion moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to see how one act of kindness can change everything. Have you ever been helped by a stranger's kindness or helped someone else in need? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about the power of human compassion to change lives.